education at Hunter College, which is in New York City. It's a CUNY school. We have Peggy to thank, our program chair, for actually making the connection for our special interest group. He began his professional career as a high school mathematics teacher in Massachusetts, working with at-risk youth. I think that's so appropriate with Karen getting the award tonight and Dr. Middleton being our speaker. His research focuses on the relation of classroom and cultural context on adolescent achievement, motivation, and well-being, and he has conducted this research in diverse community settings locally, nationally, and internationally with the support of the National Science Foundation. His scholarship includes his recent book, Motivation to Learn, Transforming Culture to Support Student Achievement. Before coming to Hunter College, Dr. Middleton has been Dean of the College of Education and Human Development at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and a faculty member at the University of New Hampshire. At UNH, he held the John and Irene Pesity of New Hampshire? Huh?
Peters, professorship.
Okay, professorship. I skipped a line. I'm rushing. This isn't being taped. Are you taping this? This isn't being taped. It's not going to show up anywhere. To support his teaching, research, and service, and was a recipient of the UNH Faculty Excellence in Teaching Award. And before I introduce you, and you have plenty of time, and Karen, I want to thank you for sharing with us those words. It's such a small world that I'm doing some work for a graduate program up in Massachusetts, and the young man who is mentoring me through the technology of Blackboard, which is always a challenge for people like me, happened to have been your student. I think his name is Hildebrand or something.
Oh yeah, Michael.
Yes, so it was like when he spoke so highly of you and the work that he was able to do with you, and I said, wait a minute, he's coming to our SIG. So with no more delay, I introduce Dr. Middleton.
Maybe I'll just shut that. Is it okay if I shut this?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. I don't know what I'll do.
Oh, good.
Well, thank you, Marie, and congratulations, Karen, and to the other award recipients. This is business meetings are such a wonderful way to bring community together, so I'm so honored to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. Just to be able to come and talk with you and engage each other in a thoughtful conversation about topics that are important to all of us. And I just want to start also by thanking the people of San Antonio, including the event staff and hotel workers and people who make events like this happen. I'm grateful to those people when we come to a different city. And particularly want to acknowledge the Coahuiltecan people who call this land Yanawana, and within this name honor the creation story shared by many people who claim Central Texas as their ancestral territory. And grateful to them as well and honor them tonight. I want to thank the SIG leadership team, Marie, Peggy, Heffer, Taylor, the other officers. I know how much goes into managing the business of a SIG, having been the program chair and chair of the Motivation SIG for a few years. You've put impressive effort into making the conference successful. And in particular, putting together an excellent program, so congratulations to all the presenters for this weekend too. The theme of this year's AERA is Knowledge to Action, Achieving the Promise of Equal Educational Opportunity. And I'd like to focus my remarks tonight on this theme in relation to the work that I do as a motivation researcher and to the work that you do in self-regulation, self-regulated learning. If we consider motivation as directed, energized action, our research areas are closely tied. The area where I have focused my research is on the goals or purposes of engaging in that action, and where self-regulated learning focuses on how a learner carries out that action. So we really examine interrelated pieces of the same motivational puzzle. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the rich history of research in self-regulated learning. My education and work has been richly informed by the contributions of Barry Zimmerman, Phil Winnie, Nancy Perry, Karen Harris, Dale Shunk, Paul Pintrich, among others. I remember Dale coming to campus when I was at Michigan with Paul and having the pleasure of spending some time with you then. And this field has provided broad knowledge in understanding how learners carry out strategic action, and has had practical applications that have impacted the work of teachers and the success of students. So I'm presenting to you tonight from a place of deep respect and honor for the work that's been done in self-regulated learning. With that in mind, I want to consider the relation of our work and motivation to the topic of advancing educational equity. To do that, I pose an important question. Given the educational inequities we face in today's society, how can we use psychological science to uncover and diminish inequity, and be cautious that we're not replicating that inequity or privilege that contributes to it? My main premise is that the research and intervention work we conduct in motivation would benefit from taking a more contextually situated perspective. If we only focus our research lens on a limited set of purposes, behaviors, and outcomes that align with schooling that has benefited certain groups, we risk promoting and continuing privilege for majority populations and marginalizing or excluding others. I want to spend our time together explaining how I've arrived at asking this question, and then come back to issues for us to discuss during the question and answer time. My hope is that my talk and our conversation leads to an extended discussion of equity and achievement, and that I learned from you tonight. My thinking around this topic is still in formation, so your reaction and input and conversation is welcome and encouraged. Let me illustrate my point with a story. It's actually a joke, and it's the only motivation joke I know. So please bear with me if you've heard it before. There's a young teacher who goes to her school and in the first couple of weeks has been assigned recess duty. And she goes out into the recess yard and she looks around. She sees a group of kids kicking the ball and playing and having fun in one end of the field, and this one girl standing down the other end of the field. And she's very earnest and concerned and walks over to this young girl and says, "Hi, I'm Miss Smith." And the girl looks at her and says, "Hello." And she said, "Well, I'm a new teacher here and I just wanted to say hi." And the girl said, "Okay, hi." And the teacher walks away feeling like she had done her duty, and she talks with some colleagues. A few minutes later, turns back, sees the group of kids kicking the ball around, having fun, and this one student still standing there alone, and she walks back over to her and she says, "Hi again." And this time the girl looks at her quizzically and says, "Hello." And she said, "Well, I noticed that you're alone and I just wanted to reach out and say hello and see if you needed anybody to talk to." And the girl looked at her and said, "I'm the goalie." So, you know, our earnest young teacher wanted the best for her students, right? She wanted a happy, playful, productive recess time. But she was working with a set of assumptions of what this would look like, a really narrow focus on a set of predetermined behaviors. Her student, however, was playing by a different set of social rules, the rules of the game she was playing with the other students. The teacher's evaluation of the girl, while well-meaning, was not an accurate assessment of her happiness, engagement, or sociability. This story represents a progression in my own thinking and research over the last 15 years, and my increasing concern for examining motivation with a more situated view. As I've shifted from social cognitive understandings of motivation to a more situated understanding, I've evolved in my thinking about what it means to work toward the promise of equal educational opportunity. In particular, I want to point to three ways in which motivated actions and self-regulated learning may be situated: within content, within social dynamics, and within cultural context. I can trace this thinking back to an article Helen Patrick and I co-authored in 2002. To be honest, Helen did the bulk of the work for this article, was kind enough to have me a second author. She was the driving force, and in that article we really advocated for providing rich contextualized descriptions of student experience that can answer the questions what, how, why, and when. In the article we described several students we worked with as part of an implementation of project-based science. The story of one student, Tawanda in particular, illustrates how her self-regulation was embedded in the science content she was studying. On our surveys, Tawanda scored low on the use of cognitive and metacognitive strategy use. But when she was interviewed, she explained how she used a computer graphics program that was part of the curriculum to connect ideas about pollutants, to visualize in her mind how this looked in her neighborhood and in the air, and gain a greater understanding of the content of particulate matter. So her self-description made it clear that she was being metacognitive in her approach to learning, even though her reports on the self-report surveys weren't indicating that. I encountered a similar story about how learning and problem solving is intertwined with content and prior content knowledge when talking with a boy in Belize about his experience learning science. And I want to credit my colleague Eleanor Abrams in the back, who we did this research together. In the interview, he explained how he did not know science very well and was not good at carrying out science experiments in school. However, his eyes turned bright when I asked him about what he enjoyed doing in his village, and he provided a detailed explanation of fishing. He liked to fish, he was proud of his fishing skills, and he described how he knew how to tear up the leaves of a certain plant, place them in the water, and they had this sort of paralyzing effect on the fish, and he could actually catch the fish and scoop them up as a result of what he was doing. So the boy, who didn't appear to have strong self-regulation skills in carrying out school-based science problem solving, had rich content knowledge of his local environment that allowed him to show his strategic capability. When we privilege certain funds of knowledge, those associated with school-based learning, we might not capture the full range of a student's or a learner's ability. So in addition to being situated within content, motivated behavior is also situated socially. And I want to recognize the strong work that's been done in this area. Melissa Grisalfi has done extensive research in situated learning and describes classrooms as, quote, a system of social practice that includes patterns of interaction, understandings, assumption, attitudes, and norms that serve to organize activity, unquote. And in that, motivation and cognition are integrated dispositions toward academic practice or work. Researchers such as McCaslin, Volay, Javala have provided insight into how interaction among peers in richly collaborative environments provide a context for the development of co-regulated learning. In a recent study I did with some colleagues about a group of middle schoolers in Maine studying the civil rights era, my colleagues and I explored the social nature of classrooms beyond group work with the thought that if classrooms are essentially social places, they're social at all times, when students are on task and off task. So we observed a group of students over several months as they negotiated tension and resolutions, both about social relationships and academic work. The central tension revolved around two students, Faith and Michael. And Michael used a lot of social posturing, like, if you were smart like Michael, you'd know, right? And he preserved his identity by doing that, while encouraging Faith, the higher achiever, to take the lead in the academic work. As the project neared completion, Faith was absent for several days, leaving Michael to assume a new role and identity to conclude the project with his team. The negotiation and regulation of social relationships provided students with the opportunity to engage or resist in schoolwork as the dominant activity. An orientation towards schoolwork and towards social relationships shaped one another and established the classroom motivation we observed in our study. And then finally, I just want to tell a couple of stories that illustrate how motivated behaviors are situated within a community and cultural context. So I've had the honor of working in different countries with colleagues, particularly in our efforts to examine motivation for science learning. One colleague on a trip to an indigenous village in eastern Taiwan interviewed an early adolescent boy about his school experience and goals. The teachers indicated he was a very engaged, intelligent boy, but assessed him as not qualified to progress in school because of his test scores. In the interview, the boy disclosed that he purposefully failed the test. If he had passed, he would have been sent to the city school away from his family. He didn't want to leave his village, so he undermined his own success and his own performance by failing the test. His behavior can be contrasted with a peer who is striving to succeed and who had already begun taking on some of the dress and appearance of urban culture. And then yesterday, my colleagues and I presented work from a study of a community-based science curriculum we've developed with community experts. Our findings in the study that we presented suggested that some students perceive a community task value or seeing value in academic work that connects to the social practices of the community around them. One quote stood out for me from a student whose class had learned about a hydropower plant near their school. And when asked what activity helped her learn the most, she cited the conversation the class had with the plant operator, who was able to use non-technical language to explain complex science concepts. Now, she felt connected to the science since it was on display in her community, and the explanation from a trusted local person who used more accessible language that allowed her to put the pieces together and form a better understanding. So what do these stories that demonstrate how learning and motivated behavior are situated within or intertwined with context suggest about privilege and equal opportunity for learning? Well, our society is dealing with differences, including achievement gaps in school and economic gaps, and these discrepancies have a direct impact on the lives of individuals and families. A range of social structures and practices contribute to that differential status. Some groups are the recipient of a societal privilege that brings them greater benefit and opportunity, and others are not. I believe that an important purpose for psychological studies is to use our theoretical frameworks and research to better understand these differences. But if our psychological concepts and research are based in social practices that contain a certain inherent bias or privilege, we may be contributing to those differences. For example, often our motivation research is based on the assumption of traditional ways of doing school that align with the values and social practices of majority populations. We don't always take into account that some groups of students are less likely to have access to rich curriculum materials, to high-quality teachers, or may be more likely to be sorted into lower track groups or special education. At times, the content of schooling might not reflect these students, their skin color, or their lives around them in their community. We know that thinking and habits of mind are influenced by our cultural and historical circumstances. They're not necessarily universal models that apply across all ethnic and cultural groups. Some students may grow up in homes in which problem-solving or metacognitive strategies develop that may not be aligned with the strategies valued in school or focused on the explicit purpose of school achievement. And often the motive for engaging in school, for social connection, for recognition, for economic opportunity, are different for those students who already receive those benefits and focus solely on achievement and attainment. All of these factors could shape the way we form psychological constructs such as motivation, goals, and self-regulation. In addition, being in an applied research field, we may undertake efforts to improve or create interventions aimed at